Welcome to the Pitchwerks podcast. I'm Scott McTaggart. Over the last 20 years, I've been a sales rep, a marketer, a manager, an executive, a consultant, and an advisor. This show is designed to give you access to my list of contacts so that you can learn more about how to present your ideas at work and succeed in your career.
Startups and salespeople, marketers and managers from the Epicast Network in Pittsburgh. It's the Pitchwerks podcast.
You'll hear a lot of people say, well, acting is about lying, it's about deception, it's about the illusion. It is the complete opposite, at least from my perspective. Right. It is about that moment of honesty. Mm-hmm. And it applies to everything. I mean, whether you have a script, it may be a fictitious script in an imaginary setting, but you're connecting with your audience with honesty.
Hello again. Guess what time it is? It's Pitchwerks podcast time. That makes it Wednesday, and I've got Scott Nunnally. Scott actually teaches people how to do improv and acting, and it seems like the kind of skill set that we might want to borrow from. So I asked Scott to come on into the Epicast studios and work with me on this. I think you're going to like it. Before you're allowed to start liking it, though, I need to nag you. I need to nag you about iTunes ratings and reviews. Get in there, 1-star, 5-star. Just, if I see an inrush of these, I might even not nag you one week. It's just more is better. It helps people find the show. Social channels, same way. If you need anything, hit us up. LinkedIn company page, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You know where to find us. Reach out anytime. Love to hear from you. And also at pitchwerks.com, Pitchwerks. So yeah, let's talk to Scott. Let's talk about acting and improv and how a team works together using the same exact ideas and discipline that an acting troupe or an improv troupe would take up on a stage. All right, Scott Nunnally. Now, some people who come in here, right, like they know exactly why they're sitting in that chair, and I can tell just by the look on your face that you're wondering maybe a little bit about why you're here. Am I right?
A little bit.
I think you're going to live, though. You've got a career, in front of the camera on stage. I think you'll survive.
Well, yeah, there's definitely a history of surviving when it was least expected. Say like 48 years ago.
Surviving when least expected. That's your tagline now.
Dad's like, no, we'll keep it.
Well, this time anyway, right? We'll see about the next time, though. I asked you in here today, and I'm going to try to give you an introduction. It's not nearly going to be all-encompassing, so I'm going to need your help filling in some of the blanks. But the reason that I asked you in is because I've seen you teach improv classes to students. And improv is a hard thing to get anyone to do. Much less middle school aged students who are in a place where they're afraid of kind of hanging themselves out there. They don't want to be different and look like they're having too much fun up there, right? They're enjoying this stupid exercise that the teacher assigned.
That is the challenge. It's one of those things that falls in the category of being simple, but not always easy. And it's easier for some and not as easy for others. It just depends on the individual. But it is something that everybody can do because it's something that everyone does. We live and we make it up as we go along. That essentially is improvisation. The simple definition from a performance standpoint is acting without a script, but it doesn't mean acting without rules.
Right. And that's actually, oh man, you just segued me in such a lovely fashion. Thank you so much. Because that's actually the way a lot of people feel when they do the types of jobs that our audience does, right? So if you're a marketing person, if you're a salesperson, even if you're just a CEO and you're going in front of, some bank or whatever, and you're looking for funding, you're going to go in there with a group, and that group doesn't necessarily have a well-defined script, and you want to reach a conclusion.
Right.
You got to get to the end of the show. So you said, and I love it, just because there's no script doesn't mean there's no rules. And I kind of want to try talking about this. What are the rules and kind of prying that apart? But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about sort of how you came to this. Like, did you study this in college?
I studied acting in college. I actually did not study improvisation until after I left college. But I fell in love with improv when I fell in love with acting. I was just out of high school, and I was asked to do a play.
Yeah.
By a friend of mine had hooked up with this local director, and the improvisation there were no script. The audition there were no scripts.
How about that?
It was just all improv scenarios, and I fell in love with it instantly. I was like, it was so liberating. I remember I got an improv scenario. You're a cop and you just pulled over a motorist who's speeding, so like instantly I'm like, I just clocked you doing 78 miles an hour in the parking lot. Explain yourself, And it was so, I mean, I was always the kid who was, I'd rather be inside, pretending to be a space explorer than, out playing. I played football too. But, I was always the kid with the big imagination. So, I mean, acting, of course, was a natural fit for me. But improv, you don't always have a script. And, we played as kids. Our imaginations were huge. So, essentially, we did improv all the time. As a matter of fact, I remember having a conversation with when I told somebody when I was younger, what I did or was, trying to getting into acting. And I had explained to the woman, I said, well, when I was when I was a kid, I did a lot of play acting. And it's like, now that I'm older, it's like, now you need to call it something else.
Oh,
I was like, all right.
A little snarly, huh?
Yeah, it was a little snarky, but but essentially she was right. There are people
Don't give her that.
There are people making 7-8 figures who are calling it something else, but essentially they're doing what we do all the time. We behave. Behavior is acting, and we act without a script. Essentially, the definition of improvisation. And I took that into the classroom. I was fortunate enough to start teaching acting for Center for Theater Arts.
Yeah, which is where I met you. The lovely and talented Mrs. MacTaggart said, you've got to meet this guy over here, Scott Nunnally.
Yes, she oversold.
She did not.
But I inherited an improv class from the director. He taught the improv class. He taught the high school students. And they actually taught me as much as I taught them because they were pretty polished. So it was kind of a give and take at that point, but I took a lot out of that first class. And I mean, for me, I didn't think there was any better way to teach introduction to acting to younger students than with, here's this way to act and you don't need to learn lines.
Right. That's huge. I can imagine they were loving that.
Well, I don't like learning lines now.
Right.
I don't know of any actor who really does. Some people are better at it than others, but I have a list of rules you need to learn. But right now we're not going to worry about scripts.
Right.
And the kids learn the rules pretty easily. But I mean, I know where you're going with as far as the rules.
Yeah.
In real life,
I think a lot of us hope that someone will just tell us, like, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't do any of these 8 things which are going to make life difficult. When you have your team and you're going to go in there and you're going to sell this account, nobody goes like, well, don't forget the improv rules, right?
One of the rules is don't think. We're so focused on how we look in any given situation. We're taught that from a young age. Don't make a spectacle of yourself.
Right.
Straighten up your clothes. So
what do you think the neighbors are going to think?
Exactly. I hope you've got on clean underwear. Well, nobody's going to see my underwear.
Well, they will if you get into an accident.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, we're always focused on how we appear, and that self-conscious thing is hard to shake.
Yeah.
Especially when all of a sudden you look around and there's a group full of people, but peers or no, they may all be in the same circumstance as you, but all eyes are on you. So, I mean, one of the first rules is don't think. Just whatever comes into your mind, you let it go. You need to train yourself to basically whatever comes into your head, you roll with it, you commit to it. It's not about being clever or being funny. It's about committing to the energy and having that braveness to risk and to give somebody else, whoever you're on stage with, something to work off of.
Yeah.
It's that yes and principle. We did talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you and I have had this conversation where yes and is the way you all talk about not negating what came before you. You don't just say, no, that's not what happened. You say, yes, that's what happened. And somehow or another, rather than using an eraser, you're drawing it in a little bit more fully.
Exactly. So the gentleman has a big mustache. Yes. And it's very gray.
My wife is my connection to the acting world. And I've had a chance to see it as a spectator, right? But one of the things that I've always seen is that, when you're reaching maybe for the perfect thing, you pass over the good thing.
That's very accurate.
And we see that too. Sometimes all of a sudden the spotlight comes to you and everybody in the boardroom or wherever you happen to be is waiting for this to be a major pronouncement because you've decided that it has to be perfect instead of it being good. And
Right.
then it finally comes out and you're like, it's all overdone. You should just not say anything. Your brain's getting in the way. There's like a traffic jam in between your ears. And the next thing you know, when you finally do say something, it's kind of a letdown because the timing is just as important as everything else. Is that kind of digging in the same place as you are in improv?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We forget the very fundamental truth. There's no such thing as perfect.
Right.
But there's right there, right now, something that I can give to my fellow partner to work with. And also, there's the whole thing about instead of focusing on me looking good, it should be about making my partner look good.
Yeah.
Or making the story good. What are we there to do? It's not about us here on the stage. It's about these folks here in the chairs who are watching us.
What's your take on the perception of confidence? A lot of times I think like, and I'm that person who sometimes yells at the television, right? Because if you're listening to the words, and speaking of comedians, one of the funniest things, Eddie Izzard once upon a time said, it's 70% how you look, 20% how you sound, and 10% what you actually say. And I don't know if those numbers are accurate or not, but the way he delivered it stuck in my head, and now I'm stuck with it forever. But again, if your delivery is fluid, people will go where you tell them to go because you seem so convinced of it, right? And a lot of times that's all it takes to get the machine rolling. Just that sense that you're telling the audience how to react to you.
That's very fair. How do you get there? That's going to be everyone's individual process. You mentioned confidence. Now, I may be on stage and exude confidence, but I'm one of those performers that I'm as nervous.
That's hard to believe because I've never picked that up off of you.
Well, there's different ways to do. I mean, there are people who don't get nervous. I wish I was one of them. There are people who are horrified, terrified on stage. The only way they can deal with it is by being on stage.
Yeah.
I fall in that category of people that takes the nervous energy and I'm actually able to focus it and use it in a way that gives me the edge where I'm conscious of the fact that I don't want to screw up. It kind of puts me in a place where I'm hyper aware
Your
of what I'm
delivery,
doing.
though. I mean, and maybe it's because you practice. You know, your pattern of speaking exudes confidence. Every time I've ever spoken to you, right? I've never had this feeling, and I mean, I've seen you in a few different settings. It's never been like Scott's obviously nervous about how the kids are going to do today, or Scott's obviously nervous about how he's going to do up on stage today. I've never once, if we had to take a bet, I wouldn't have said that's the bucket you're in, is the one where you're like trying to harness all the nervous energy. If anything, the vibe I get off of you is that this is old hat. Like you've been there and you've done that.
Well, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? It's you practice. It's just a matter of repetition. I know that there have been times. I remember singing in a play, one of those post high school plays, where I'm not going to tell the lie and say that I'm a great singer. I'm really not. Despite the baritone.
Oh, the pipes are lovely.
I can hold a note. I can carry a tune. That's about the extent of it. But that first time singing in front of a group of people, I was like, "Oh, you have a good voice, but you were nervous as all hell."
Yeah,
So I mean, you take those kinds of things with you, and you kind of learn. You get a bag of tricks that you learn. But I mean, something else that and kind of segue to what has been kind of my underlying principle when I'm performing, and it's really something that carries over into pretty much every discipline. Anytime I'm in front of people, is you'll hear a lot of people say, "Well, acting is about lying. It's about deception. It's about the illusion." It is the complete opposite, at least from my perspective. Right. It is about that moment of honesty. Mm-hmm. And it applies to everything. I mean, whether you have a script, it may be a fictitious script in an imaginary setting, but you're connecting with your audience with honesty. And that's where, when I'm connecting, when we're having an honest moment, me as the storyteller or the actor and you as the audience member, I don't have to oversell that. That's where people are, he believes that moment. Mm-hmm. That's what's moving them.
Then this is another way in which you and I are doing the same thing. Everyone thinks that, not everyone, a large number of people believe that in order to represent a company or a product or a service, that there's this force working on you that says that you have to cut the corner, fudge the truth, whatever. And I'm sure some people I know a lot of people have tried this, right?
Sure.
On the other hand, very few of them have seen and done some of the stuff I have seen and done. And I've only been invited into those rooms because I'm a raw nerve and I'm totally willing to talk to you about the real story of what's going on. I cannot say enough about committing and feeling it, as opposed to, like, I used to do a lot more sales training, and I used to say, this is not Hogwarts, right? There's no like incantation or collection of syllables that all of a sudden makes like a puppy appear, right? Like, how do I get a sale, right? And, you're like, okay, well, just read from this book and wave your wand in a circle. No, you've got to do some of the explaining, but it's the feeling behind it that actually makes it so people understand what you're talking about.
It's absolutely the feeling. I used to sell cars.
Did you?
I did.
So did I.
As a matter of fact, the car that I drive now, I have because I sold Fords.
How about that?
But I mean, and you know this as well as I do. When somebody buys a car off of your lot from you, it's not because you have that only car. Ford makes millions of those cars.
Yep.
It's not because you're the only lot that does what you do. It's
no,
not
by definition, it's a commodity.
It's because when you say what you're going to do, you make them believe it.
You know what somebody said to me today that I really liked? It was, make sure your yeses mean yes and make sure your no's mean no.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the other things take care of themselves. And at the time I was like, that's kind of nice, right? But then you realize that that's the building block for everything else. If someone says, can I have this, or can we do this together, or will this work? And you give them an answer that's not exactly what you said it was going to be, you can't build off of it. You can't go any further than that first step of, is this a trustworthy person?
Right. Which means if the answer is no, the answer is no.
It better be, right? Cars are a fascinating one though, because it's more of a show maybe than some of the other businesses that you can be in, right? They have the balloons that they put up, right? The flailing arm man out front some days, the radio remote where like the local radio station comes out and be like, come on down. And Gentleman Jack from 93.5 is going to be out there up front handing out pizza and beer. And like this whole thing is a spectacle. It's a show. You should have been right at home if I'm right.
And the test drive.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Make sure they take the test drive. Why? Though ironically, I didn't drive my own car before I took it off the lot.
That is awesome.
I trusted the dealership I worked for.
Yeah.
And fortunately I wasn't wrong. The car was cool.
Trust is a big, powerful word. I'm a big fan. So you're there. You're in the middle of these transactions and whatnot. You had to have been connecting the same dots we're trying to connect on the show today, right? It's like you're seeing the parallels.
Well, I mean, and I think you mentioned this earlier about, it's hard for some people to be good salespeople because they kind of view it as a flim-flam show.
Yeah.
I actually had to make that transition. It was hard for me to get into, because so many people approach the sale as, you got to make sure you're pulling the wool over their eyes. It's the magician show. It's about distraction. You want them focused here. You don't want them focused here.
Right.
And it completely fundamentally went against everything that I believed in as far as being honest in the moment.
Yep.
And learning that I could be honest was very liberating for me. But I mean, they're at the lot.
Oh yeah.
They've got $20,000, $40,000, $60,000 to spend on this high ticket item.
Yeah.
They want to like what you have. And, and that's, I think, to open this up, I think everything we kind of approach it, viewing it adversarially.
Yes.
I mean, as an actor, you go to an audition, the people behind the table, they want to like you.
Yeah.
You have to
They
recognize.
want to find their person, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're having been on many auditions, very unsettling auditions. You come in and you see these faces behind the table. I auditioned for Kevin Smith once.
Okay.
I didn't get the part.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's Kevin Smith. And I was like, he's going to hate me.
Really? That's where you went first.
And he's behind he's looking for somebody to fill this, to fill his part. I had the worst audition line ever. But that's a story for another time. But I mean, we just kind of have this, we build up in our mind that it's this adversarial, it's this contest thing. It's really not.
It's the fear of loss whispering in your ear.
Yes. Once again, I'm self-conscious. How am I going to look?
Right.
But yeah, these people, the people who've come to your lot looking for a car, they're going to spend money somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's unlikely anybody just hangs out because it's a good time.
Right.
Let's go down to the Ford store today. Yeah. Right. High five montage plays. Going out to the Ford store. Now, one of the interesting things about all that, though, is the fact that it is still a team game, right? So it's like, and this is where these principles of improv come back in, right? And you say, okay, now here's Joe, and Joe's the finance person, right?
Yes.
And you guys now have to have this charming banter or whatever it is so that everybody knows that the transition's not going to hurt them. And again, it's like, I've watched, especially in my car days, I've watched some of those handoffs where you bring a teammate in go terribly. So I'm going to introduce somebody new onto the stage, right?
Okay.
What's the right way to do it?
Well, I mean, you could reduce it to its most basic elements. Introduce them.
Right.
Let them go.
Have some fun with it, maybe.
If and you listen to him, and when I say listen, whatever he brings, you work with it. If you say hey folks, I want you to meet my friend Bruce, and Bruce takes a shallow breath and starts to turn white. But yeah, the point is you give Bruce something to work with.
Yeah. I always used to like the one where you say, so you want to work a little bit more today? Because nobody answers that one. Yeah, let's do more.
Right.
And then they would always come back with, oh, it's not work. I love my job. And everybody rolls their eyes a little bit because that's a terrible way to answer that one.
Well, nobody, it's the virtue of not being believed.
So here's what I would like to know. If I'm sitting in a meeting and I've got, colleagues to my left and my right, and we're trying to impress, let's say you, right? How do we work together? What's the right way to prep to sort of like have a nice fluid handoff back and forth? I mean, again, you've been on stage, for how many years now? I have to believe you've got insight into this.
Well, I mean, from a performance standpoint, it's very much about being on message.
Yeah.
So it's no one person is there to shine. It's about committing to whatever that particular narrative is that we're creating on the spot. Mm-hmm. It's not about being clever. Everyone's heard of Robin Williams.
Yes.
Everyone's heard of Dan Aykroyd.
Right.
One actor, a comedian who was common to both of them, said that they would much rather work with Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd was every bit as fast and funny as Robin Williams, but Dan Aykroyd went out of his way to set up his fellow actor,
okay,
his fellow comedian, where Robin Williams was always on.
And he sucked all the oxygen out of the room.
And he tended to do that. Billy Crystal said about him lovingly that, if no matter how fast you were that night, he had to be faster. He had to be more clever.
Right.
And when you're Robin Williams, you could pull it off.
Oh, yeah.
At what expense, we don't know now in retrospect. But they said I'd much rather work with a Dan Aykroyd because he was about setting up his fellow actor. It's about, if you go into a boardroom, you guys are on point with that one message. What do we want the potential client's takeaway to be? Right. So, you don't know, you can perhaps anticipate what their initial reaction is going to be to, what you say. But if, Judith goes in this direction and they're not hearing Judith, either because she has the wrong message or her delivery is off, then, maybe Veronica picks up the message, and she comes at it a little bit differently. But these guys are listening to each other is the point.
Right.
These guys they're one unit because they're hearing each other. And like I said, that's the same principle with acting, with improv. You're listening. That's, the bedrock principle.
I would say a lot of times, though, the reason that people aren't listening is because of that fear we were talking about, right? They're so worried that it's like processor power got pulled away from their listening to go to their worrying function, right?
Sure.
My chip was running fine until you added fear into the mix, and now it's overburdened with these extra cycles of worry and like self-consciousness and looking at my shoes, like things that shouldn't have been taxing all my resources are now keeping me from listening. And I truly believe this, and I think it's also one of the reasons why a more seasoned actor, whatever you want to call it, responds better, is the fact that they're not just reading the script, they're playing off the feeling because they heard a little bit more fully. Is that a good way to capture it?
Sure. I mean, you think about you working with a script, how many different millions of ways can you say the same line and give your fellow actor something different to work with?
Oh,
and give a different message to your audience.
I grew up with this exercise. My dad, he used to have us do I didn't say he stole the money. I'm sure you've played this game with your students.
Sure.
I didn't say he stole the money.
Right.
I didn't say he stole the money. You put an emphasis on a different word as you go through, and it changes what everything means. And yeah, that's not written in the page. Maybe there's some boldface, but it still has room for interpretation.
These pretzels are making me thirsty, the Seinfeld one. Sure. It could be anything. Well, these pretzels are making me thirsty. These pretzels are making me thirsty. These pretzels is making me thirsty.
No, you're right. I mean, that's the full listening, because there's connotation on not just the words, but what do they mean, and what does it mean when you say it like this?
So, and you get into the whole thing too. You're in that pitch in that sales meeting, energy, intonation, intent, all of those things factor in. And like I said, if Trudy's tired, Trudy's was up all night because she had a kid vomiting.
Right.
Joe's going to have to pick up the slack. But once again, you've got 4 heads. I don't know how many people you have in there pitching, but you have one idea, one goal.
Yeah.
And when you're listening, you're not just listening to each other, but you're also picking up on the cues of your pitchee. Are they hearing me? When do they perk up? What's turning them off? The
fuller listening, though, again, if we assume that it's a function of being a little bit more relaxed, right, or a little bit more accomplished. I heard you earlier. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice, right?
Sure.
Do you ever do like a relaxation or whatever because it helps you to listen better?
Absolutely. Certainly with acting, there's a whole slew of different kinds of preparatory exercises, all starting with breathing.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough that when I was in college, one of my professors actually had us delve a little bit into Tai Chi.
Okay. Yeah.
Which was breathing. Because another one of my professors, who was colleagues with this gentleman, said one of the things that is annoying is when you hear a public speaker, somebody doing the news or somebody speaking, and you hear that. It's like and
Buzzy and I spend a lot of time taking those out of the show when they happen. Absolutely, because it's a message in itself.
It is.
I can learn from that sound, and it's distracting at a minimum. Right? Like, whoa, wait a minute, hang on a second. What did that little sign mean? Does that mean he's frustrated? Does it mean he's bored? Does it mean he wants to move on to another subject? We have to take it out.
Right.
Now, I personally, as a person who probably 7 years ago started having panic attacks. I mean, they're pretty good now, but I needed to learn those exercises because I was getting to a point where I could only think about the panic attack when they hit. And they hit back then a lot more frequently. I had a number of them over like a 6-month period. And I couldn't get outside of myself. I couldn't hear what was going on in a meeting while I'm freaking out. And
Sure.
I'm getting the sweats. I'm like feeling a little lightheaded and whatever. And it was the breathing exercises and the relaxations that helped me sort of like come outside of myself and start participating back in the conversation. And then from that level, I advanced to a higher level, which was, okay, now I'm listening a little bit more completely, and I'm watching body language, right? That's one of the reasons why I'm picking at this as a topic in particular, because I have like up close and personal front row seats to it, right? Where I saw how it affected my ability to listen, and my inability to listen hurt my ability to do my job. So, do you ever match energy though? Do you ever match the energy of the audience? We call it mirroring in the sales and marketing business, where you're trying to basically not overshoot their energy level or undershoot their energy level, but kind of meet them right where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it would depend on what you're trying to accomplish on stage for sure. I know a lot of times you'll meet an audience which they just suck the energy right out of you because they're not reacting.
Yeah,
and you learn later on that doesn't mean that they're not enjoying it. And that's where it gets tricky.
They're just from New England. You're very reserved up there, okay?
But yeah, I mean, certainly that's one of the joys of a live performance, which is why you'll hear many actors say they prefer to do theater because they get that immediate gratification.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing a comedy and you're getting laughs from your audience, well, you're hitting everything. You're hitting everything. You don't need to push. You don't need to oversell the joke. Everything's working. They're tuned in.
Yeah.
You're doing the same script, and you hear crickets. Your temptation is to be, well, I need to, we're not connecting. We need to push this further. And just like I said, there's sometimes you do some more risque material, let's say.
Yeah.
And you catch that gasp.
Oh boy.
You might not punch certain moments as hard that you might have punched if the audience was eating that up.
Still a function of listening, though.
Absolutely.
What are you working on? On the the creative front these days.
Well, these days, I've resigned to critiquing the works of others. As an artist, I kind of I've always resented critics.
I can imagine.
But I'm critiquing films now, and I think the reason I'm doing it is I love films. I like movies. I've kind of adopted the philosophy that I never like to bash anything for the sake of bashing it just because I don't like it.
Okay.
Making movies, among many creative works, movies are among the hardest things that you can create.
Oh, I'm sure. And if I may, you don't know what the reaction is until after it's too late to change it.
That's exactly right. But for the most part, it started off as a hobby. I like movies. I like reviewing movies. I have an opinion, like most people.
Yes.
I think everybody has an opinion. But
most people didn't study at college for their opinion, for what it's worth. Just tossing that out there.
Well, appreciate that.
So where can people find you online?
We're at Something's Spoiled.
Something's Spoiled
on YouTube. Our Twitter page is at Something Spoiled.
Okay, so we got to put two S's next to each other, or we'll get the wrong one.
Yes, it's S.
I want to make sure of it. Yeah,
something apostrophe S spoiled.
Yep. But don't do that on Twitter because they don't like the apostrophe.
No.
Scott Nunnally, I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing some of your insight with us. This was a great conversation, and I know, like I said at the beginning, you were kind of arching one eyebrow, going like, I'm not 100% sure why I'm here, and I think you see it now, and I think you could see the parallels.
I've stopped looking for the guy with the gag and the garret. I think I'm okay.
I think you did great. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
All right, that's all the time we've got. Thank you to Scott Nunnally for coming in. I really appreciate the insight as to how actors and improvisational performers sort of work together. I think there's a lot of that, in what we do, and it's hard. It's very difficult getting direction on how a team should work together and what are the rules, how should you all team up. I think this is valuable and insightful, and frankly, I think Scott talked a lot about some of the deeper values of what we do as well. So again, a very valuable guest, and I appreciate having him. We're going to go back to work. We're going to put another show together for you. It will be back here, guess what? 7 days. It'll be next Wednesday. I hope to catch you then.
The Pitchwerks podcast comes to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a production of the Epicast Network and McTaggart, LLC. Engineering and production by Buzzy Torek and Nick Miller. For more information, show feedback, and ad sales, visit pitchwerks.com. pitchwerks.com. On social media, find and follow the show on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram using that same brand name, pitchwerks.